It is closely associated with the Socratic method of debating, the Socratic. But he borrowed it from the sophists, much earlier, I'll say this. But he developed it. Plato developed it into a technique of philosophical argumentation. By the way, all of Plato's writings, about almost 40, are in dialogue form. They're all dialogues of Plato, not the works of Plato. But of course, they're very dramatic too, not just. He also developed into a literary genre. Today, dialectic is a literary genre. People write in that. It's a very beautiful genre. Through its question and answer method, Socrates showed the absurdity of the position of the other person, hence the validity of his own. Now you keep arguing and you show that the other person, what he's saying is absurd. By consequence, your position is correct. Today it's used in pedagogy too. When people teach children to debate in order to reach some point. Historically, this is my contribution to this subject right here. Historical dialectics is a Heraclitean heritage. Heraclitus lived around 500 BC in Ephesus. Ephesus is a city, Paul went to Ephesus. It's on the western coast of Asia Minor, ancient Asia Minor, Ionia actually. So his concept of flux, the word is flux, his concept of flux or constant change is opposed to essence or permanence. Nothing is permanent, there are no permanent essences. Flux is the reality. It is the first statement on dialectics, flux. In the dialogue Curated, Plato wrote about this concept. As reported to him by Curated, he called the dialogue Curated, by the way. Curated was a sympathizer of Heraclitus, but Heraclitus never had a training after them. A school like Platonic school or Aristotelian school. Plato wrote, then, 50 years after Socrates had died, I believe, he said, Heraclitus says that all things pass and nothing stays. And comparing existing things to the flow of a river, he says, you cannot step into the same river twice. This is a slope that is so much. People repeat this very, very often. Heraclitean dialectics and metaphysics shaped Platonic philosophy because Plato restricted change to the world of phenomena, that is this world, and permanence to the world of ideas or ideals or the form of Plato. Hence, Platonic idealism, that is ideals or ideas. In addition to constant change, flux is also about the unity of opposites. This is very interesting. Unity of opposites. Over time and through constant change, he said, Heraclitus, things are both the same and not the same. The implication is that there are no permanent essences. Things change. Opposite. And some things, for example, also have different qualities depending on the situation. Seawater, he says, is bad, it's good for fish. So seawater is neither part good nor part. It has these two, depending on who's drinking that water. Since these discussions are also about my understanding of dialectics, because it's quite different from everybody understands dialectics in the details, not in general, as a general concept. Speaking of identity, in my last book, this book, I wrote, so-called national identity, Armenian identity, is not an immutable essence. It is like a flowing stream of water that starts at a source and flows in a bed. As Heraclitus said, the waters flow and no man ever steps into the same water twice. For it is not the same river and he is not the same man. They will all change. Even though the source, my spirit, is the same. My Armenian American experience of 18 years now made me see different terrains and horizons to flow freely. After every bend and encounter, my Armenian experience here in the state, I metamorphosed differently, yet kept flowing. Encounters are at the core of both my writing and art. So it does change you, so you become a different person, and you start with writing differently, painting differently, thinking differently. There is no essence, it's just a spirit that is the source of the river. It's not the same river. I'm not the same person 18 years ago. I couldn't be in this environment. Heraclitus was an antithesis. This is a very common word. Antithesis, antithesis, synthesis. He was an antithesis to the first philosophers of the 5th and 6th and 5th centuries, of course. He was an adversary, he was a critique of all these Milesian philosophers, and he invited these first philosophers, mathematicians, Plato, Parmenides, all these figures, he invited them to concern themselves with human beings, the polis, the state, the city-state, rather than the cosmos, because they never understand the cosmos. So why don't you busy yourself with people, with society, with the state, with morality, of course. He was an aristocrat anyway. They say king, but he was no king. There was no kingdom. He was an aristocratic figure anyway. Half a century later, Socrates, my idol, followed in his footsteps. He was an adversary of the post-Peloponnesian War Athenian people. The war had ended, of course. He invited philosophers to focus on man and the city and the morals, and not the cosmos, because the cosmos lies beyond your knowledge. You have no way of knowing the cosmos. He criticized the Olympian gods. He criticized Homer and the big poets. So, because they led Athens to their defeat after the Peloponnesian War, he was critical of what should have been done during the war, and anyway, he went to the war. He did go to the war and took part of it. Had Heraclitus lived in post-Peloponnesian Athens, defeated Athens, like Socrates, he too would probably have been tried, accused by majority vote, and killed by poison. Heraclitus was exactly a Socratic figure in his own way. But if he was in Athens, he would have been tried because he was a critic, he was an adversary, he was outspoken, and went too far in this. So we have these two, but they're both directly played. Aristocrates too. He talked about definition. He was the first one to talk about definition. But still, he didn't believe he could attain it. He didn't believe in his invincibility. But he wasn't there quiet. Anyway, he wrote nothing. We're reading Socrates through Plato. I mean, we don't know Socrates actually. We know Socrates through Platonic dialogues. On the stage of Western philosophy, Dialectics officially appeared 23 centuries later through the genius of Hegel, in his metaphysics and logic. Hegel died in 1831. That is the beginning of the 19th century. If it were not for Hegel's genius, Heraclitean logic and metaphysics would have been lost completely, because he was the first one who saw the potential of the idea of dialectics 23 centuries later, after Heraclitus. Heraclitus wasn't very popular anymore. Later in the 19th century, dialectic logic was based on Darwin's theory of evolution. It is very much at the basis of Darwin's theory of evolution. In other words, progression with the organism, the environment, the clash between the organism, and then the creation of a new kind of species and the survival of the species, and then the whole process is very dialectic. It's deeply influenced by Hegel's dialectical philosophy. But Marx, in particular, is the one who, beyond Hegelian idealism, dialectic idealism, had his own dialectical materialism. That is the basis of Marx's philosophy. While Hegel's dialectics is dialectical idealism, Marx's dialectical materialism, because the base of everything is matter, which is economic situation. The most recent and significant contribution to the concept of dialectics belongs to Theodor Adorno. Theodor Adorno died in 1966. He lived in the state for over 10 centuries. I mean, avoiding the Nazi persecutions, he stayed there for a while. But the idea of negative dialectics, and he calls it negative dialectic, is his. His negative dialectic, now this is negative dialectic, is a non-static, restless form of thinking. Simple like that. Non-static, restless form of thinking. Some people have a static way of thinking. That is linear way of thinking. This is non-static and restless, that is keep moving, a form of thinking. It does not proceed, this kind of thinking, nor is it expected to arrive at transcendental truth. That was a dialectic person does not have to pursue transcendental truth. It is the type of his thinking, the way you look at things, not assuming anything, not guaranteeing anything, constantly trying to do beyond what you see. That's dialectics. So that's why it's negative, because you're not seeking transcendent truth. You're just moving on this level. Negative dialectic offers a bold regime for a self-reflexive critical philosophical disposition and methods. Because in your methodology too, you should be dialectic, but you have to keep moving, then trying to see what happens through your contradictions. And also you should create interfaces between yourself and your environment, and everything you encounter. By the way, the title of my book is Encounters and Convergences, is clearly, explicitly a dialectical statement. Encounters and convergences. At present, and 2 centuries after its formal introduction into philosophy and social sciences, dialectics is science by pedagogy, and it is widely used everywhere. It is not a controversial, although it is often confused with dialectical materialism, which is Marxism. It has nothing to do with dialectics. Dialectics is a philosophical attitude, methodology, perspective, so it has nothing to do with dialectics. Materials. Philosophical. Dialectics goes to essentialism. What is essentialism? It is the view that objects have set attributes and permanent essences. If you refuse this, that's the beginning. In other words, things are what they are, and they're constantly changing depending on what they encounter, what happens to the process. Now, by dialectical perception, I'm proposing 3 kinds of dialectic. Dialectical perception, dialectical thinking, and dialectical praxis or application, praxis. Dialectical perception, by perception, I mean a critical oppositional way of perceiving things. It is a way of looking at things. It implies a reluctance to grant seemingly natural and established facts. Nothing is natural. Nothing is established. You can see it differently. So if you have this disposition not to grant anything, it is natural that the son should obey their father. It's not natural. It is not an established fact. And who said it's natural? Who decides the criteria for natural and unnatural? Acceptable and non-acceptable? They're not set. I mean, it's an open field. And you have to think it and then you can perceive it. So usually, sometimes so-called natural things are reification. What's a reification? When you take something that is non-existent as if it was existence. Some people say that, what is a reification? There are so many, like, even something like justice, outside the literature, is a justice. When my son was young, very young, he used to tell me, is there any justice? And I used to say no. Is there any injustice in the world? I could say yes. Yes, it's there, it's in the books, it's a theory, it's a concept, but it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. But it's not a reification, it's an abstraction. Reification is even worse. I mean, it's even, you can go farther with the reification. By dialectical thinking, dialectical thinking is systematic reasoning, properly. It is not constant, it is very systematic thinking. I'm a very systematic thinker, but in this case, it is based on juxtaposition of opposites. That's the system to go. That's the way to go, like Darwinian evolutionary theory. It is the organism, there is the environment, there's always a clash, there's always a battle between the organism and then the organism develops and changes. And then when they meet another organism, then it just is the kind of tempo that is unending, that is open, eternal. Thinking, by the way. It's memory. It is not just to refuse everything. That is childish. When you say no to everything, 2, 3 years old, say no to everything. That is very childish. It's adolescent. It is to arrive at more relevant truths. The truth that I arrive at must be more relevant to my circumstances, more satisfying, more acceptable to me. I may change it tomorrow. I may completely change my mind tomorrow because I probably saw something more relevant, and I'll start going after that one. So it is simply not being static in your thinking. It's being constantly, dynamically following something, maybe you get at a better place. And dialectical practice is simply application. If you're a dialectical person, your art and writing will definitely be not like someone who writes in an essentialistic manner. That things are what they are, and then there's this immutable system of the universe or whatever. That is being essentialist, and of course, very, very, very traditional. Totally unacceptable. In my writing, and I'm a dialectical thinker, I have used counterpoints as tools. These are my tools. A counterpoint is by the way, it's a very common word. This is a very interesting subject, by the way. I haven't read so much about this one. It's an idea, an argument, or a theme, or an image that creates a contrast. Contrast with the main element. It's a contrast, basically. As a verb, to counterpoint means to oppose, to negate, to be an antithesis to something, to an established thesis, to be against that thesis. The aim is to highlight a different and more relevant statement through opposites. Initially, everybody knows counterpoint is a musical term. It was used in the Renaissance for the very first time, and it comes from the Latin word punctus contra punctum, that is, point against point. It's a Latin word, or note against note. It was first used during the Renaissance, as I said, in the sense of polyphony. Then, in the 15th, 16th century. But Bach developed it, more than anybody I know, into an extremely sophisticated level. I mean, if you like Bach, there's always this heavy background dark, and then there's another melody, It's basically creating a composition that is relative contrast in general. Now, today we understand the art of combining different melodic lines that are harmoniously interdependent but independent. The tunes are independent but interdependent because the aim is to create a unity, a central theme, a unity around the central theme through contrasting or different melodic lines. That's counterpoint today. But today, counterpoint is a traveling concept. It's a new term. Traveling means it is used in different disciplines. Counterpoint is used in debating, in pedagogy, in music. It's just in literature. By the way, whoever knows Edward Said, you haven't got Edward Said, have you? He uses the word contrapuntum as an adjective. But in his literature, and I've read a lot about this one, he uses the word in the sense of heterophony. In other words, you know Edward Said. He was the voice of the Palestinian, right? The other voice. And there is the voice of Western establishment. All he wanted was to have his voice heard. Now that is almost polyphony. That is two voices heard. He didn't want to destroy the other voice. He didn't say that the Western voice is wrong and the Palestinian voice. He never said that. He didn't believe in the coexistence of different voices. He simply said that, please hear my voice. I am a Palestinian, a migrant, this and that. I mean, Edward Said used it a lot, but he didn't use the word in the sense it should have been used. Counterpoint. Counterpoint is a very complicated term. It is not the way. The only place where you meet counterpoint in literature is Edward Said. Other than that, very few people ever use. But in music, yes. In music, it's very much, it's there, it's very much, especially in contemporary music. So, in contemporary perspective, what is dialectics today? It is best understood through Theodor Adorno's philosophy. If you have patience and read his books, they're not easy to read. There's several books, especially negative dialectics, or his aesthetic theory is a masterpiece, but very hard to read. In his books, he's the first one who really writes about dialectics. In his critique of contemporary for Edward Said is 1950s, 60s. A lot has changed. That's not contemporary anymore. It is not. But in his time, Because he started writing these theories in the 1930s with his teacher, Paul Kyle. They came up with new theories in 19. This is, by the way, this is the Frankfurt School. This is the critical theory, basically. Today there are some, not many, of their school. So the theory they produced, which is very applicable, is the culture industry theory. The very well-known theory, the culture industry. And there must be thousands of books about this theory, by the way. Every day I see a new book about the culture industry theory. But Adorno's aesthetic, by the way. So culture industry, that's the theory. According to this theory, an overwhelming and powerful culture industry mass produces and controls the arts and culture. The mass-produced culture and art. And of course, social media. Thus, preventing autonomy and freedom of thought. When culture is mass-produced, when everything you see is mass-produced, it is under the control of a producer, and it's producing the artistic work as consumer goods. The minute they become consumer goods, there the problem starts with people. That's when you lose your autonomy because you're buying standardized goods. A monolithic culture, because the whole point is to come up with a monolithic culture, a monolithic and well-controlled culture, needs a conformist society to dispense its goods. Everybody should like what you're selling, what you have produced. It has to be a conformist society. It does not expect nor does it tolerate opposition or free thinking. They cannot be tolerated by autonomous individuals, people who can think for themselves, free from any other influence. Therefore, the culture industry relies on passive acceptance of the reader, the listener, the cinema goer, the consumer of cultural goods. Under circumstances, therefore, to be true to themselves, to the society to which they belong, artists and intellectuals must be critical of what is going on, and they must be oppositional to what is going on. Intellectuals and artists, of course. I mean, I don't separate artists and intellectuals. It's just intellectual artistic culture. Don't say artistic culture or intellectual culture or this culture. It's just culture. It is multidisciplinary. They all depend upon each other. And if there is one basic idea, it is in all the ideas. Because you live in this moment, you live in this world, you cannot come. I mean, dichotomies are artificial. They're suspicious. Dichotomies are artificial. For example, I come from philosophy. When I do historiography, people tell me, I mean, really, are you a historian? No, I've never studied history. Do I have to study history in some school? I can study history on my own. In other words, there are no dichotomies between philosophy and history and sociology and whatever. And the sciences too, of course. I mean, these dichotomies are artificial. It's all basically the same. From the perspective of Adorno, and really I do respect the guy, if you try to read Adorno, it will be prepared. It's not easy. You have to go back and forth until you find the main thread, because it just takes off. It's very poetic. It just takes off, and then you have to go with it. Eventually you get somewhere. From the perspective of Adorno, the art and sculpture must be in a continuous state of social awareness and dissatisfaction. That's very important, dissatisfaction. Dialectic requires being opposed to mass-produced and controlled art. You have to be against these art. By the way, even in fashion, I will not say, maybe I shouldn't say this. Why should women dress up the way designers want them to dress up? Should an everyday woman like me tint their hair? I should have a special type of hair, a special type of dress. I should really follow the fashion. I should have my nose shaped up or whatever. Then I will look creative. This is standardization. This is homogenization. This is simply trespassing, stampeding with autonomy and freedom of thought. As an artist, then you should express this in your work, in your writing, in your whatever you'll be doing. So this is satisfaction. If we perceive that, this is a very important paragraph, I like to read it more. If we perceive reality as an evolutionary process, which it is, reality is a process, as all sciences do, by the way, it's an evolutionary process. And if we also look at society as being torn apart by injustice, fundamental antagonisms, unnecessary, and conflict, then we have to accept that dialectical thinking is forced on us by reality itself. This is how reality is, so this is how we should think about reality in this contrasting situation. There is no other choice, because reality is what it is. To avoid misunderstanding, I must emphasize here that the most significant aspect of dialectical perception and thought is not just being oppositional. That would be, as I said, adolescent. It is a utopian faith in the possibility of change. You should believe in the possibility of change in order to be a leader. You're not directed simply to oppose everybody or contradict everybody. That is childish. You must have a faith in improvement of things. So dialectical thinkers today are utopian. They are utopian, even they don't say that. You must be utopian. These two guys must be utopian to do what they are doing. You should believe that what you're doing, despite everything, contradictions and conflicts, this will change something. Otherwise, being dialectical doesn't mean anything. It just shows a methodology, a perspective, but it doesn't go that far. So, accordingly, in individual writers and artists thought and taught meaningful form, I stress it's meaningful form, both perceptual and cognitive. By the way, I do stress the cognitive part. Perceptual is not enough. There is always understanding. If a work of art, if I look at a work of art, I also think, don't I? Can I avoid thinking? Can I escape thinking? But I'm a cognitive person. I think. And when I think, I should think systematically, not random thinking. I should really follow some kind of syllogism. It's almost syllogistic, but a different kind of syllogism. You know what's a syllogism? All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, example. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. This is syllogism. But this is how I think, because I follow my reasoning. Perfect aesthetic form arises from this tension of form and content. That is how I draw, how I think, how should I put this thing. Consequently, the reason that contemporary trends in the arts seriously suffer from lack of content or truth content. Lack of truth content, again, the word is Adorno, not mine. Truth content is a theory of Adorno. Truth content. It is because they fail to fulfill the function of expressing cognitive insight. They don't make me think. They don't give me an insight to my head, to my brain, to my head. So conceptual solidity, I don't find that much. Or existential tension. In other words, a work it should form an existential tension. That has to do with my questioning of myself, of my own existence. So, there's obviously an unscrupulous underestimation of public's taste these days, if you look around, if you go around exhibitions. And intelligence, especially intelligence. One cannot talk in any seriousness on the aesthetic path drawn by artworks, such as urinals, but that's very old Duchamp. There is a reason why Duchamp sent that urinal to the museum. But filthy beds hanging on the walls. I will not give the names of the artists, or even soiled diapers on museum walls. But this name I should give. It's by Mary Kelly, my teacher at LAU. Soiled because that showed the crisis, a postpartum crisis, when she started changing diapers. So those diapers hung on the walls of the museum because they showed postpartum crisis. This does not make sense. There's no content, there's no cognitive content. Now the message of these works is consumed in the initiative. In other words, the message of the urinal that Duchamp sent, it was already consumed in the act of sending, and at that time. Because that's a long story, but the message is there, that the minute it was put there, it is consumed already. It stops giving you any aesthetic meaning or value or enjoyment or whatever it is. Now the essence of being an artist, an intellectual, as far as I can, is being critical. If you are a critical person, don't even think about becoming an intellectual artist, because what you get is probably commonplace or meaningless. Ron Eierman, he was a Dutch philosopher, he is a Dutch philosopher, not was, but he must be 80 now, said that the intellectual is an identity formed in opposition, as well as in a special and temporal context. However, as we see today, intellectuals and artists often turn into self-interested collective actors, rather than social critics or participants in an alternative culture on the margins of society. If you want to say something new, you cannot be in the system. You have to stand on the margin and then address the society you want to change or you're dedicated to. Now, in the end, and beyond complicated theories, I'm sorry if I bore, but I mean, philosophy is philosophy. You must have a taste for it. And beyond this complicated discussion, the drive to think freely and seek change are immanent to scholarship and the arts. 2 centuries ago, this drive was called modernism in the 19th century, about mid-60s. It signaled the significance of intellectual and artistic autonomy with the implied social consciousness. Definitely, there has to be a social consciousness in everything people do. The term comes from the late Latin adjective modernus, the derivation from the word modo, which means present, right now, modo, right now, present. Edouard Manet, I'm sure you have heard Edouard Manet, who died in 1983, by the way, is often called the first modern artist. That's what he's labeled, the first modern artist to speak with, he broke with tradition, and he's the forerunner of modern art as we understand. Modern art is art that started with Impressionists, that is the early Impressionists, and around 60s, 1860s, 1863 to be exact. I suggest that a closer look at the middle decades of the 19th century will show the beginnings of radical modernity in the works of and the writings of Gustave Courbet. Nobody really busies themselves with Gustave Courbet. Look what he said. He was a contemporary of Manet, Karl Marx, geniuses of the late 19th century. As a modernist and humanist, he not only contradicted aesthetic theories, traditions, the evolution of subject matter. That's where he started. The evolution of subject matter. Manet did not revolutionize technique, he revolutionized subject matter. It was later impressions revolutionized the technique. He also captured the social historical embeddedness of the arts. They are embedded in social historical circumstances. Much more artistically than many impressionists who, if you see his work, his works are fantastic. And he was more philosophical than Karl Marx when he spoke about modernism, more philosophical than anybody I know in that age. In an open letter labeled as the Realist Manifesto, I hope you read this whole thing. He wrote, Courbet, each epoch must have its artists who express it and reproduce it for the future. The human spirit must always begin work afresh in the present, starting off from the quiet results. The real artists are those who pick up their age exactly, their time, at the point to which it has been carried by preceding times. Beauty, like truth, is a thing which is relative to the time in which one lives, and to the individual capable of understanding it. If you don't understand it, you cannot produce beauty. The cognitive aspect. Some decades later, Lev Tolstoy wrote, art is a human activity consisting in this, that one man, consciously, by means of certain signs, hands unto others the feelings he has lived through, and that other people are infected by these feelings and experience them. If art is as important a matter as spirit, or if it is a spiritual blessing, essential for all men, then it should be acceptable and accessible to everyone. And if, as in our day, and he's talking the early 900, 120 years ago, if in our day it is not accessible to all men, then one of the two things. Either art is not the vital matter it is represented to be. One of the two things. A critical and creative spirit and intellectual courage are both scholarship and art. Heraclitus considered himself an independent observer and thinker. He wrote, something, by the way, he only has 140 fragments, that's all we have. We don't know how much he wrote, where, anyway, he kept them in the temple, and they were discovered much later. In fragment 112 he wrote, some thinking is the greatest virtue and wisdom. Then he said, in the next one, ethos anthropoi daimon. It means the character of man is his guardian spirit. Man's characteristic. He simply turned one's fate or path into a function of one's spirit. Socrates called this spirit my personal daimon. Socrates, that's what he calls it. My personal daimon says this, my personal daimon says that. The daimon, the spirit. So that's what we inherit. And thank you so much. Dialectics is more or less more comprehensive. The worst thing about dialectics is the misunderstandings around it. It is not what people think it is. It is not a system. It is a completely different way of looking at things.
Question.
May I jump in? I don't have as much of an education in philosophy as you do, but I do have some. And I'm familiar with the more classical Plato's dialogues as well. And the way you were talking about dialectics is not quite exactly how I understand that term. So please let me share that nuance, and I have one specific question related to that. It's not so much the way you described it in the earlier part of your lecture. You characterized Socrates as entering into a conversation with someone and making them understand that what they think is wrong and what he thinks is right.
So, by the way, I modify, not that right. He's the one who said that. You think you know. I am the one who knows that does not know.
Exactly. So I was about to say that. And the point of the dialectic is not to say who is right and who is wrong, but it is to arrive at a truth. Now, later in your lecture, you mentioned a more relevant truth. And this is the part which
that's my understanding.
Which I wanted to highlight. If we believe that, maybe we believe as modern human beings that there is no truth, capital T, but maybe we don't. And I have to also emphasize, I cannot say much about the modern philosophers you mentioned. I'm ignorant. But if there is a truth, and if we can arrive at it through dialogue, through our conversations, I wonder how that practice can be applied to the creation of art.
To what?
To the creation of art. Is
the process of creation of art?
Yes, is the point of the process of creation of art then the arrival at the truth? Or can it be something?
In the case of art that I want to talk about in the third lecture, in the case of art, it is the so-called truth is the true content. Not the truth as such, not in kind of philosophic. The content of that work should really think more about reality, understanding being the event, the objective. So in art, that is the content of the work that should lead me to understand more about the situation, which is not permanent again. It will change. I do different variations of the same thing, trying to take, for example, I have about 8 banyan trees. The banyan tree fascinated me for its struggle, its constant struggle through stone and through hundreds of years. I mean, it is a defiance of the laws of nature. It is just this movement. That is the truth of the banyan tree. So I keep drawing banyan trees to see which one, when do I really capture the spirit of this tree.
What I would like to suggest is that there might be elements of phenomena that do have some essence or permanence.
Elements of what?
Of things, anything, whether it's a banyan tree or whether it's an idea, that do have some essence, that do have some permanence. and that different aspects of
yes, there is an essence, but it's not permanent.
well, I would like to suggest that it is, and that the dialectic is trying to draw closer and closer to that. I would like to suggest that the most compelling works of art are the ones that reflect those permanent truths and that return to again and again, generations through centuries, not contemporary.
What you're saying might put more in the arts rather than philosophy.
Maybe, yeah.
Because I mean, the aesthetic enjoyment.
Yes.
That, for example, look at the, for example, Roman, Greek architecture, the Parthenon. Today, standing over there, I happen to like Greek music a lot. So when I watch this YouTube, and then sometimes they do it around the Parthenon, and yes, it has an attraction, but that is perceptive. This perceptive approach to things makes it easy to enjoy more. The harmony, the perfect proportion, the way Greek art balances itself. By the way, it does balance itself to opposites. Greek art is always based on opposites. For example, Aristotle said that the most beautiful really is that which has more contrast rather than more. That's very much for if you buy the infusion to Greek music, it always has two levels, at least two, or sometimes three. All the instruments play different tunes, but there is always this bass tune and there is this other tune, but there is this central thematic centrality. The thematic centrality sustains the work. If you don't have this is why counterpoint really helps the centrality. Bach has superb thematic unity, but he uses counterpoint more than anybody else. So in art, what you're saying may apply much more than historiography is another story. We can debate that. That is another thing. But the dialectical thinker in historiography is a better thinker, a better historian than an essentialist, or a traditional thinker who's completely. We're going to talk about this. History is not the history books. History is something else. There are history books. A history book is an artifact. It's a piece of literature. That's all it is. Then we start thinking what is, or other things. Even Freud, that kind of theory. Contemporary Freudian critiques. But then again, Freud is Freud. He said something which is far superior than anything anybody had said before him. But then people who came after him, they really started it. They did use his theory, but as an antithesis, and now we have a synthesis, and then synthesis becomes. It's synthesis, but not oversimplified. You should never oversimplify the triad. The triad is not a simple thing. People tend to do that. We shouldn't do that. That's very dangerous. The thing is the spirit of negating, opposing, critical, hoping to get to a better place. Hoping to find a horizon where everybody, we can sit and talk and debate as we're doing now. That's the whole point. Because we never get to eternal truth, ever. But we should keep doing this. Maybe we'll find a better truth source, quote unquote. There are no such things as truth. There is no such thing. There are no eternal truth. I am very much anti-essentialist. The minute you become essentialistic, then that's the end of it. That is the end of it. We have to keep you moving. Well, yes.
If this overview is the approach to Western dialectics, is there a counterpoint in either?
Yeah, all dialectics is by counterpoint. In other words, the antithesis is a counterpoint.
I'm curious what the Islamic world or the Eastern world would have to say about this based on your expertise.
I didn't get your question.
If this is Western dialectics, the past hour of your lecture, where is the Eastern dialectics or the Islamic dialectics? Are they saying similar things, or are they a counterpoint to
Who's they?
the Islamic scholars or Eastern philosophers? Where are they within this conversation?
Christian philosophers?
Non-Western.
Non-Western.
Non-what?
Non-Western philosophy.
Who do you mean non-Western?
I'm asking.
Like Buddha or
Is, or
Confucius.
even in Islamic philosophy.
Buddhism is completely, it's a very, very different attitude. Buddhism cannot be compared to anything Western. It's holistic. First of all, it's holistic.
Well, I said Buddha.
Yeah. How about Buddhism? Where
Oh,
is the
Buddhism, by the way, by Buddhism, we have first let's distinguish. You mean theoretically or whatever it has reached us as written Buddhism, because Buddha never wrote anything like Socrates, or traditional, or it is the way it is practiced.
No, I said Buddhism, she just meant anything non-Western, like Islamic or, I guess she means is there something different?
Maybe she means process philosophy, not just evolutionary process philosophy. Some, by the way, Karl Barth, for example, is very Darwinian, let's say, but at the same time believes in the theory of creation through stages. An evolutionary creation in phases. Somebody must have triggered something, just pushed a button, let's say, and the whole thing started. By the way, everything starts by one cell, an embryo or whatever. There are many creational theories. Yeah, there are, but it just, logically, to my mind, these things don't work. I mean, being dialectical is a completely different attitude. Completely. That's why Plato said change belongs to the world of phenomena, things. But, for example, mathematics, 2 and 2 will always make 4. I mean, but this is common sense mathematics. This is not contemporary math. This is not that simple. It's not that simple. Numbers are permanent. But for him, ideas, there were ideas for everything. For example, the perfect definition of a man, of a human being, they are there, up there, and everything else is an imitation of that idea. Platonic ideas, sounds naive to me. So it depends how you see things. But religions, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism is different, Hinduism is different, the Japanese religion is different. Animism, African Christian philosophers, there aren't that many Christian philosophers anymore. It was more during the 40s, 50s, 60s, there were some very Christian philosophers. But today, as we speak, there aren't that many. These are theologians. There are theologians. Theology is a kind of argumentation for the truth of theological truths, which, by the way, themselves are assumptions, mostly based on mythology. I mean, holy books, scriptures, or whatever. So, I mean, you cannot, religious thinking can never be. I studied theology a lot, by the way. It's just you have to accept theology as a kind of game of concepts, assumptions. Victor Brown, for example, the concept of Trinity, there must be 100 million books about Trinity. The concept of Trinity. Where does it take you? I mean, after Wittgenstein, right, the positivism of the early 19th century, we are positivistic. If we don't see something, we don't believe in its existence. We cannot talk about these things as if they existed. So today, theology is a separate field for people. You should start by believing to become a theologian. And then philosophy has nothing to do with theology, with that kind of theology. Unless I do history of theology. I mean, history of religions, that's fine. We do that a lot. I mean, what is Confucianism, what is Buddhism, what is Taoism, Eastern religions, they're so different. Catholicism, Orthodox philosophy. I mean, the beliefs of the Armenian church are quite different from everybody else, by the way. Our understanding of the Trinity is nothing like anybody else's, by the way. It's very, very different. We shouldn't be, and we are very tricky, by the way, in tricky definitions to avoid. I mean, I cannot believe how tricky these people are. Definitions that avoid all kinds of criticism. They come up with definitions you cannot attack. Because it's so fluid, so airy that you don't know what to eat. It's just, they're very smart, by the way. Armenian Christianity is good. We don't have theology. Armenian Christianity does not have theology. Not systematic like Catholicism. Catholic theology is very clear. Syriac theology is very clear, very Protestant theology. Martin Luther, I mean, he has very solid theology. Others. So, I mean, theology and philosophy just don't mix. You cannot be critical and opposition in religion, can you?
I'm sorry, first, what we mean by God. What we mean by philosophy is really talking about the questions of wisdom. And the first people who really tapped into the questions of wisdom were people who were bringing together the two fields. So there was no distinction between philosophy and theology until really
In the beginning.
Absolutely.
No, in the origins.
Yeah, in the origins, they are
Everything starts. If you look at the Vedas, what are the Vedas? I read a lot of Vedas. They're beautiful. Their theology, their philosophy, moral philosophy, psychology.
I mean, it's always great.
Wow.
So what we have.
These are the beginnings of the business creation. I mean, this is why I say that. Well, of course, it's separated. I mean, it was all a battle of, I mean, it was a political battle. For example, I have written a lot about dissidence. Christianity as we understand it today, by we, I mean more or less Orthodox, because Orthodoxy and Catholicism are not that far apart. It's about the nature of Christ. Now, the Christology is what differentiates the nature of Christ. Is it one or two? How do they mix? That's the whole point. But generally thinking about religion or the supernatural, at the beginning they're all the same. Theology. I would say after Socrates. I would say because the minute he started criticizing Homer and the Olympian gods, he drew a line. Nobody says this. I think that's where it started separate. He kept talking about definitions and morality. He criticized the gods for their immoral conduct. If Zeus mates with humans or even sometimes animals, that's immoral, he said. Never mind Zeus. He shouldn't have done it. I think the separation starts by Socrates. When Aristotle stressed definitions, then we broke from religious thinking altogether. But otherwise, in the beginnings, yes, they're the same. They're the same. But today's philosophy is it is so much changed after all. Depending what school, contemporary philosophy or philosophy of language. Philosophy of language is so, I mean, after Wittgenstein, now it's not easy to talk about language. It's not easy to talk about language. It's not simple. We cannot simplify language. Language translation, linguistic thinking, these things are huge.
So taking all of that to the point of convergence or sort of counterpoint, where would you put the conversation between theology, philosophy?
I can't hear you.
Bringing all of them back to the convergence and the counterpoints of theology, philosophy, and the arts.
Oh, by interdisciplinary, I mean there should be no sharp distinctions. They cannot. Of course, every discipline has its methodology and language and tools, definitely. But as a philosopher, I should be aware and know quite a bit about politics, sociology, psychology, religion. I should know about arts. For example, I believe in this kind of intercultural education and awareness.
So is this essentially returning to what, for example?
No, it's not returning. We're so much more sophisticated than we used to. So much more. Today, when I talk about any art, if I don't know about contemporary, a lot of psychology, I should know about society, I should know about sociology that has gone so far in its findings. I should know about everything. I mean, I don't like these restrictions between. For example, I do a lot of research. I was trying to research an episode in Egypt and the Armenians there. How did they end up there? How did we get to have 100,000 Armenians in Egypt in the 11th century? I mean, what is going on? How can these people go there? The clues were in poetry, but historians never mentioned it. It doesn't sound good. It doesn't sound right. So I should really read medieval poetry to understand medieval politics. I found so many things in medieval poetry. There's so much there. Because poetry was something people wrote, it's like chronicles. It was like a chronicle. Or the Arabic chronicles functioned as social media. Have you ever read Arabic history? They write in Samuel Alexi, in the 11th century, he started writing on this day, this and that happened, and this guy told me this, that guy told me that. Very much in the Arabic style, which was basically actually Roman, much earlier. It wasn't actually history. Anyway, I do refuse, of course, the dichotomies. Armenian historiography itself should be it's so complicated. I mean, you should know poetry, you should know geography, you should know, and you should be non-essentialist to understand. For example, talking about the concept of diaspora or Eastern Western, that's not a simple subject. I mean, Eastern and Western Armenian is a very big subject, nobody wants to talk about. There is no Armenian diaspora. There is no Armenian center and periphery.
Yes.
This is my thing. There has Armenian Christianity is not written about. Armenian Christianity is not written. You know why? Because we had so many so-called dissident trends. If he's a dissident so-called, he's still Christian. If he doesn't think Christ was God, then that's the way he thinks. Many people think like that Christ wasn't a God. An anthropocentric kind of approach to it. In other words, we have this what we don't like as dissident. The minute you say heretical, then it goes off. Then it's not part of the discussion. We cannot do this. There is no heresy or orthodoxy or the right way of doing it, or natural way of doing it, or unnatural. It's just one big field. This is Armenian reality. I should be a historian, an artist, a person of literature, in order to get all these, details. Today, people write history of art, Armenian church architecture. Without knowing history, you will never understand Armenian architecture history. You should know why there are Islamic motifs in Armenian churches. I mean, nobody forced anybody anything. They just built their churches. Why do they use this Islamic? In Ani itself, which is very much a 10th century place. So that's what I mean. And of course, when I do historical research, it's not like when I paint or I draw. But still, that history is in my head, is in my way of thinking. Then it does have an existential dimension. I mean, I don't do history. I am historical. I don't do philosophy. I'm philosophical. I don't paint just for painting. I paint because I'm an artist too. I'm also a mother and a grandmother and God knows what. In other words, this totality of things, this perception, this complexity of perceptions does help you practice in the various disciplines. It does help a lot. And also, you read anything, everything these days, you can read anything, everywhere, just anytime. This is so lucky that I can read anything I want to read. It's all there. Today's education is so much different. Must be very music or whatever. Yeah.
So, there are all sorts of things going through my mind, but 3 things, and you don't have to address them necessarily, but what is it? I'm kind of reflecting on what she said too. So I'm very interested in computational linguistics, and I studied at Wittgenstein on the Fulbright Scholarship for a year, and everything is about truth propositions and logic, right? So modern philosophy is really a lot about you have a certain symbol, you have the opposite of the symbol. When the opposite of the symbol has another opposite, then you have the word unification of the 2 symbols. You have a truth statement or not a truth statement. And that's why computers are also built. Now, I'm always uncomfortable because I'm an atheist at heart, or an agnostic, when people say, oh, but philosophy and theology are the same, because the word had to be, it's Judeo-Christian, infused with the breath of God. That's kind of bullshit. If you want to think of it that way, that's fine, but it's not really true, right? It's a metaphor, which is beautiful in a way, but to me, it's not.
The metaphoric nature of things is the very essence of art. Art is a metaphor.
Right, exactly, so that's where the two kind of become similar, but I think what's very interesting about counterpoint is how it's used in logic and computers, the origin of things, right? How you create, like what is artificial intelligence, like how do you create something that's almost human from oppositions, which is what we're talking about, right? So I find that very interesting. The other thing which is different, I think we've gone into a lot of trouble with liberalism today, because I'm personally the biggest liberal on earth, quote unquote. But the idea that everything is equally valid and you don't challenge it is how we come into trouble, both in academia and the arts. You know, you say, whatever, I don't want to get into polemics here with people, right? But you all know all the different things, whether it's about gender, religion, truth, ethnicity, what's in Azeri, what's in Armenian, what's in Western Azerbaijan, what's in Eastern Armenia. I mean, you can say whatever you want, but there has to be some type of truth content or some type of thing that you're reacting to when you're arguing about these things. Otherwise, if you say everything's exactly the same, nothing has any
That's a
meaning.
starting point.
Right, exactly. You know
That's
what
a
I'm saying?
starting point. It's just a starting point. You have to enter someplace.
Right.
For your own sake. For your
But I think that's where a lot of these horribly, whether it's an adolescent or whether it's an academic or whether it's someone, it's where you get into these people that have, it's an intellectual void because there's no argumentation. It's just green is red, well, it's not, green is still green.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's the other thing. And then the only other point I had, I thought it was interesting you talked about the Hovsepian Wars, because Armenia just basically lost this 3 wars in a row. So when you compare, if you were to make a really strange analogy between Sparta and Turks and Armenia and Athens, or whatever it advanced as Athenians, is there something we can learn from Socrates and from the Athenian state that lost, you know, to the Spartans, kind of in part because they thought they were smarter than the Spartans, which is one. I know I just asked you 3 different crazy things, sorry.
No, I mean, I have nothing to say to that.
Yes. Nothing to say. Okay, so I missed a little part.
Yeah.
Yes.
I missed a little part of the discussion about the dialectics and their different ways of interpreting it. So to me, and I know dialectic, that behavioral therapy that Marshall Lehman developed, and it's heavily based on religion or Buddhism and Christianity and other, and studying everything. And it's to treat mental illnesses such as borderline personality disorder, right? And the basis of it is accepting that 2 things that are true can exist at the same time, but be opposing to each other or contradicting to each other, that they can both be true. So to Chris's point, okay, so art can be an Armenian land, and it's also true that it's not an Armenian land anymore, right? So you have to accept these 2 truths that are both true now. So is that your understanding of dialectic in philosophy, in art, and whatever it is?
More or less, yes. It's there. It's good thing. But I go more into the beginning of the process of thinking and writing. The premises. I'm trying to, the premises. The process is important, but the premises should be correct. I put emphasis on the premises. The first proposition to start with, to do anything. You never know where they're going to lead you. There is this aspect of all things too. I mean, you start where you start with the certain methodology, you don't know where it gets you. There's always a surprise in the process. You may accept things you didn't want to accept in the beginning. You may see things you didn't see in the beginning. And you have to surprise yourself in the process of whatever you're doing. I mean, an atheist may start praying.
What I think is fascinating is when you code just simple, basic logic, right? Intuitive logic, right? X is Y, X is not Y, and therefore and y is not q, therefore x is q, because the two oppose each other and it's emphasizing the third. Same thing with neurology when you look at, I don't know, when you have like neuronal passages or systems that are kind of similar to, and then at some point you have this almost, what we intuit is that at some point the two kind of almost converge where something that's quote unquote artificial or, in your neurobiologists, you're probably not more than that. But there's some point where artificial and real intelligence or artificial pathways and real ones become similar because of the way they're constructed. Am I wrong?
Artificial and biological systems are quite different systems.
Is there a time where,
And such that artificial systems are based on mathematical truths.
right,
Whereas the idea of truth in actual biological systems doesn't exactly work. And so I know that when we were 21st century philosopher, Catherine Mallard actually, she uses dialectics to explain what in analytical philosophy they would call the explanatory gap, what the scientists can't actually find out and might not even be able to. And that's where scientific theory comes in Hegelian terms, synthesis or explanatory gap on this side of it. And so, and she actually tries to, for example, in the idea of going from neuronal to the mental, she says it's plasticity, the idea of synaptic plasticity and how we can have this. So, for example, so the idea of dialectic in the light of science now is kind of thinking about exactly what is the gap that can we actually find out scientifically, or we don't even have access to that type
so that's what I'm actually asking, like, what is
So,
that gap and can we bridge it? That's what's like kind of interesting. I mean, like which is almost illogical.
that's basically 21st century philosophy. It's that gap in science can answer.
I have one more question, and it's like a specific
And then we
question.
have books, if you guys want to buy a book.
Right, and this
For
is,
like, how much are the books, $20?
What?
How much are we selling books for, $20 each? Three books. Yeah.
so you mentioned Dadoyan, and I did what my thesis that I wrote was heavily influenced by Dadoyan and the theory of hermeneutics. So how does hermeneutics relate to dialectical thinking? Is
Oh, I gave a lecture on hermeneutics. I really take it very seriously as analytical thought. It's all an interpretation. It is all a perspective. Now, in the past, about 50 years ago, they used to call it perspectivism. Actually, the word perspectivism was coined by Nietzsche. Perspectivism. Today it's hermeneutics, but with an existential, basically, very strong base. Of course, it's all interpretation. It is somebody's explanation, so to speak, interpretation of something. History is so hermeneutical. It is so hermeneutical. In other words, I didn't give an example. You know the trial of Socrates, right? In 399, he was tried and majority vote. The second time, it was even worse when he came back. Then they tried him and they killed him, so far. This story, the proceedings are the same. Xenophon wrote the story. He was a commander, of course. He was a military man, who, by the way, has a book about his passing for Armenia. And Plato wrote the book. Plato was in his early 20s. He hadn't written anything. Read the two books. Just put them on your table. The Apology of Socrates by Xenophon, the Apology of Socrates of Plato. This is hermeneutics. Two different personalities come out of the two books. Totally different. The Socrates of Xenophon is a nagging, annoying old man who nags and arrogant and talks too much. And then the sooner you get rid of him, the better off you are, because he talks about the government. He was this nagging old man, moralizer, very annoying moralizer. The apology of the Socrates of Plato, I cannot conceive of Western philosophy without Platonic thought, which started at Plato. I mean, the Socrates of Plato became the protagonist, the spokesman, the embodiment of Platonic thinking or this dissident thinking for their time, the Homeric culture of Athens. They altered the whole thing. Also, they use the term. So this is just hermeneutics. Everything is hermeneutic. I very much am with the hermeneutic approach of things. I read this thing at UCLA. No one understood what it's hermeneutic. Everything is like Gadamer too. I mean, even they picked up there. And Gadamer's discussion of the horizons is amazing. Amazing how you encounter things with convergences and convergences, and you create a horizon for discussion, and we all come together and then we discuss things, and we debate and contradict each other until we come to a point where everybody sees a different perspective. It is, yeah, hermeneutical, yeah. It's almost all now.
Just because I figured out.
It classes as language has explained everything. And there isn't a single piece. Social philosophy is getting better. Interdisciplinary thinkers are doing some good work. Adorno is very dominant, but not many people they don't think they should be artistic to understand Adorno. Should very much into the arts to understand somebody like Adorno. It's not just pure philosophy. So, anyway.
Thank you so much.
Shall we sign, do we want to buy those?
Yes,
Yeah.
maybe, and then.
Thank you.
Cash or credit card?
You know, we didn't
Yes.
discuss it, yeah. How much?
I mean, yeah, no, I mean,
However
yes,
you want. So, yeah, all right.
yes, right.
Or you can email us, it doesn't matter, we don't have to do it right now.
And
Karen is a
Okay.
I will never find you.